Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about proof of work versus proof of stake. You might have heard that proof of stake has some advantageous characteristics versus proof of work. Well, today we're going to dive in on that. And before we dive in, I want to say hi to my sponsor, CryptoTag. CryptoTag is a great way to back up your Bitcoin. So when you create your backup, when you create a hardware wallet, this is what you can store your backup on. If you can see here, you've got little numbers and you can etch this in. This is on titanium, which means that it can withstand many types of fires. It can withstand earthquakes, getting crushed, getting even shot at. On their website, they even shoot it. So if you need to back up your Bitcoin on something stable, something secure, CryptoTag is the way to go. All right, with that being said, let's hop on in. So I write proof of work versus proof of stake in my the Held Report newsletter. This newsletter comes out first on Thursdays. The subscribe link is below if you'd like to check it out. Okay, so the basics. Note that this article isn't going to cover anything around throughput or monetary policy. Those are both interwoven into proof of work and proof of stake systems, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to skip over that. When Satoshi designed proof of work, he was fundamentally changing how consensus was found between humans. And before it used to be political votes, and now it was apolitical hashes via the burning of energy. And essentially, proof of work is proof of burn or validation that energy was burnt. And proof of work, ultimately, what's really cool about it is that it's about physics, not code. And the Bitcoin blockchain produces a block reward for these miners in return for expending the work. And here's how the game theory functions. Miners are compensated in the currency, Bitcoin, they've been promised to organize transactions properly. If they decide to perform a 51% attack, they would be destroying their future expected rewards. And they've already expended their upfront costs because they've had to buy the machines and the electricity. Now, the difference between proof of work, so that describes proof of work. With proof of stake, capital is staked or put at risk in expectation of future reward through locking up tokens over a set period of time. Stakers get randomly selected to verify transactions on the protocol and are incentivized to maintain the integrity of transactions by being rewarded with new tokens. A very similar function to how proof of work, and how it works. If a staker behaves improperly, falsely verifying, ordering transactions improperly, they will get slashed, which means they can lose a portion of their coins. So proof of stake is a fundamentally different type of system where proof of work is about capital that has already been spent. So proof that work has been done. And proof of stake is proof that there is capital at risk. And so proof of stake advocates claim that proof of stake is more efficient in terms of energy consumption and other advantages, but I think that these are a little bit disingenuous, and I'm going to dig into that below. So a couple issues with proof of stake. One is ownership centralization. And by the way, if you want to read more on proof of work, I wrote Proof of Work is Efficient. It's one of the most popular articles on proof of work. So this is on my website, Dan Held, Proof of Work is Efficient. So the only way to own a proof of work coin is to mine it or buy it. And this ensures maximum fair distribution. And I also cover this topic in depth where I go through the early distribution of Bitcoin, different Bitcoin miners and how the rewards have been given over time. So in a proof of work system, you have to mine it or you have to buy it. Either one requires work. With most proof of stake coins, there was a pre-mine, which means that some of the coins were issued to a select group of early individuals or early investors. For example, Ethereum's pre-mine had a 70% initial project distribution with around 50% being sold to 100 individuals. That's claimed by Francis over here. So, with going back to how each system works, a proof of work miner needs to buy equipment and electricity with an uncertain reward. They know that they're going to receive some portion of future block rewards, but they don't know how much. This ensures that there is churn in the validator set as a return is not guaranteed, because many things can go wrong when mining. With proof of stake, capital is put at risk, but with very little upfront costs. Over time, we see that this means that proof of stake coins will likely become more and more concentrated in the hands of existing hodlers. Vitalik claims that proof of work, and he did this in his article, which I recommend everyone go check out, why proof of stake in November 2020 on his website. He claims that proof of stake is fairer because it requires less working capital than a commercial mining endeavor with proof of work. However, it requires a minimum of 32 ETH staked, which is beyond the reach of most common hodlers. We'll go into later how you can participate in a staking pool, but then you're not truly decent. You're pooling your money together with everyone else, and you don't have control over those coins. Additionally, the internet connectivity and storage capacity price most folks out of running a ETH-ful node. There's a lot of threads on this. Eric Wall does a great thread where he attempted to create an archival node, but it's not trivial to get this up and running. Due to complexities around like slashing, maintaining high uptime, and the minimum requirement for staking, this pushes a lot of proof-of-stake stakers, like I mentioned previously, to centralized services. For example, like exchanges offer staking services where you can go and stake on an exchange, and this is advantageous because you don't have to have that 32 minimum ETH size. Also, for example, the ETH staking reward can compound, but I believe you have to save up to 32 ETH to launch another validator. So most folks don't earn that much in yield. They might need to go, if you want it to compound, you have to keep it on a centralized venue or a staking pool or a decentralized staking pool, which Hasu has talked about. Another issue with proof of stake is there's no real return. And so in his really great article, A Stake in the Heart. So A Stake in the Heart, Ben Davenport, by the way, used to be one of the co-founders at BitGo, a really sharp guy. He wrote A Stake in the Heart, which talks about how proof-of-stake systems gradually erode the purchasing powers of hodlers due to the baked-in perpetual inflation. Participants have to stake to maintain their purchasing power. For example, like if you have one Bitcoin of 21 million Bitcoin, you know exactly how much you have of the network. With proof-of-stake systems that have permanent inflation, you have to make sure that if you don't maintain that purchasing power, you're being eroded over time. So, for example, like some proof-of-stake systems have 60 to 70% participation rates, but depending how difficult the staking is and the yield is, they could be much lower. This means that potentially like half the network might not even be staking and losing purchasing power over time. So he highlights that, and also that there's a nasty side effect with inflationary rewards. They are taxed as income by most governments, whereas non-perpetual inflation proof-of-work systems, like Bitcoin, hodlers of the coin have no taxable events when hodling. This means that over time, proof-of-stake holders will slowly have their stack eroded and absorbed by governments to pay for the income tax, to pay just to maintain their purchasing power or their representative percentage of the network. There's also a weird issue around when you're staking, taxes are calculated at the moment that they're received. But if you hodl that or don't immediately go sell it for your taxable liability and the coin stays flat or goes down, if it goes down, you might have a huge issue because you've recognized income at a higher value and that value of the asset that you hold to pay for that tax has dropped. Proof of stake also has something called an issue with network connectivity. So with proof of work, if the internet became partitioned for a brief period of time, let's say we cut the proverbial internet cable between the United States and China, then that would result in several variations of the Bitcoin network that fork at the moment of disconnection. However, it has a built-in mechanism to deconflict this. The longest accumulated proof of work chain is the leader. So when the network becomes reconnected, the longest chain will become the official chain. But in proof of stake, there is no built-in deconfliction mechanism. So there has to be a source of truth, likely to be an individual team or company that says this is the proper chain. This is called weak subjectivity. I felt that term was a little bit more technical and complicated than just talking about it as network connectivity. And this was a really cool quote from folks over at the Blockstack.org. So Jude had a really great piece on proof of stake chains. And he claims that there's a mathematical impossibility to it. So he says, to elaborate, the proof shows that if a node has been disconnected for a sufficiently long period of time or is bootstrapping, aka getting started, and is presented with two conflicting transaction histories, then it is impossible to determine which one is the true chain without some external input, some sort of group or individual to point. This is because it's impossible to know whether or not the committee that validates the chain is a majority honest and not post facto corrupted, i.e. attacker controlled. In practice, this means that the user has to resolve the conflict out of band using some knowledge about the honesty of the chain's current committee. This is not the case for proof of work blockchains, where the valid source of the most cumulative proof of work is always the true chain. As I mentioned up here, with proof of work, it's the longest chain by accumulated proof of work. So with proof of stake, if this partitioning happened, we'd have to rely on a subjective group to tell us which one is the correct chain. This is not elegant. This is not easy. Blockchains are inherently created to not have these sort of circumstances exist or minimize these. With these, we would require a very tricky situation where a group of individuals, that may not be so clear cut. It may not be like there's an attacker chain and a proper chain. It could be very subjective as to which chain is the correct chain. Also, what's really interesting about proof of stake is that proof of stake throws off a yield, and that yield competes with DeFi and CeFi yields. So DeFi, decentralized finance, and CeFi, centralized finance. Centralized finance would be like a let-in or BlockFi, or like your Bank of America savings account. So what this means is that the yield throw off by hodling directly competes with the riskier DeFi and CeFi yields. This could result in a non-optimal security spend, as most hodlers will be enticed by higher yields with DeFi and CeFi. Whereas in non-perpetual inflation proof of work coins, hodling is completely disconnected from security spend. And security spend, the block reward, is a representation of an increase in adoption or adoption in aggregate, as represented by the subsidy plus the transaction fees. All right, so last one here, energy consumption. This one's a big one. A lot of folks talk about this. Proof of stake proponents will often tout Bitcoin's energy consumption as a negative element. I think this is a little bit disingenuous. The protection of the Bitcoin network is rooted in real world costs in physics, which is great, whereas proof of stake has more of a circular reference because it's staking coins that are in its own system versus proof of work taking energy from the real world to validate something in the digital one. The Bitcoin ledger can only be immutable if and only if it is costly to produce. The fact that proof of work is costly is a feature, not a bug. And this is, I think, the biggest issue folks have. It's the public ledger, Bitcoin's ledger, is protected by the collective hashing power, the sum of all energy required to build the wall. And through this transparent, costly design, it would take an equivalent amount of energy to tear it down. And that's called unforgeable costliness. Nick Szabo came up with that term. So in conclusion, if we use an analogy of a rocket engine, Bitcoin's proof of work engines have enabled it to get off the launch pad, cruise through the upper atmosphere, fly to the moon, and sail right on to Mars. We're on our way to Mars. It's tried and true. With proof of stake coins like Ethereum, they're looking to swap out the proof of work engines for experimental proof of stake engines when they're only halfway through the atmosphere. This is a huge risk of malfunction for a minor return while trying to solve some issues that aren't really issues. For example, the issue of energy consumption. That's not an actual issue. Satoshi didn't choose proof of stake for a reason. He chose proof of work. And so with that, I hope you found this valuable. Hope you found it a valuable intro to proof of work versus proof of stake. I definitely recommend checking out these links and going in further. I will share these links at the bottom. Thanks for watching. Cheers.